I'm the Blood Guy. Welcome back to another review of a film based on a real life serial killer. Yes, this is not a documentary this time. I'm going back to an actual film. It's been a while since I've done one. And yes, as you can tell, this is another Dahmer film. This is the only film based on Dahmer that I've not reviewed yet. I will be re reviewing one other one, but as far as films go, this is the only one I haven't reviewed. And it's one that I've seen before. It's been a long time. I probably saw this once, probably back in 2009, 2010. It came out in 2006, and for the longest time, I probably would have said that this is the worst film centered around Jeffrey Dahmer or related to Dahmer in any way. Or at least based on the true story in any way. I'm not counting ones like Dahmer versus Gacy, and I'm not reviewing stuff like that. But it's a 2006 film, and it's Raising Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, I actually just re-bought this because I first bought this again back in 2009, 2010. Actually, at the grocery store for $6. I didn't even know about it. I think this was the first movie based on a serial killer that I had seen. Up until that point, I was just watching a bunch of documentaries. I was still in high school. And then I saw this, and I thought, well, that sounds really cool. I bet this would be a real creepy. I was kind of expecting more of like a slasher kind of movie, even if it is told through the eyes of the parents, which I'll get to. And I thought this was such a piece of shit the first time I saw it. At that time, I was not familiar with Uwe Lamel, but I would have put it in that realm. I think I actually fell asleep, and I only remembered like two scenes out of it. I just remember the acting being terrible. I remember the look of it being awful, the way it was uh, told, its non-linear nature, which I do like non-linear, but this was such an unorganized way. I had completely forgotten about this film. So then recently, I was at the store that I go to, and I just happened to see it for super cheap, and I thought, well, it's the only one I have left to review. Why not get it? And this had just come in the mail. I was lucky enough to find a bootleg of this because this is my favorite Dahmer documentary. So you have one of the best and one of the worst things about Dahmer. I figured, well, I got the Dahmer tapes. Why not check this out? And I have to admit, I I went into this movie expecting to hate the shit out of it, just like I did almost 15 years ago. But to be honest, I didn't. I mean, it's still a very, very, very poor, bad movie, but there was a lot more going for it, and a lot more that I've forgotten that works. Now, it was directed by Rich Ambler, and it was written by Wood Wood Dickinson, who also produced the film, and co-written by Christopher Ryan. It stars Scott Cords as Lionel Dahmer, Kathy Barnett, I believe, as Sherry Dahmer, uh, Janine Hutchings as Grandma Catherine Dahmer, uh, Erin McCrane as Joyce. It still says Joyce Dahmer, even though they were long divorced by then. We have a guy named Rusty Steary as Jeffrey Dahmer. He does all right. His acting is it's poor. I mean, he's all right in looks. I don't think there's one scene where he wears his glasses, but in looks, I've seen worse. Um, his acting, it ranges from bad to serviceable. And some of the bad scenes, I'm wondering if
Because the whole movie's
pretty much told through flashbacks. It's centered around Lionel eh, finding out that his son, Jeffrey Dahmer, has been arrested for murder, and he just finds out, it keeps getting worse and worse. So most of the movie, probably 90% of the movie, is flashbacks. him reflecting on all these different uh, times, events, scenarios throughout Jeff's life that he should have seen as warning signs or that he should have acted more on. And some of those scenes, I'm wondering if his acting was bad on purpose. Because, like, there's a scene where a flashback to when Dahmer first has Lionel and Sherry over to check out his apartment. And Lionel sees the padlocks on his bedroom and the freezer. And when he asks him why, he gives this very creepy, poorly acted, intentionally creepy delivery of, just trying to be careful, Dad.
It's a bad neighborhood. You can't be
too careful. Like, I'm wondering if, and again, maybe I'm giving the movie too much credit, that what if since this is Lionel remembering certain things or trying to recall, red flags, that maybe it's clicking with him that, yeah, that was creepy, or now he's remembering it in a different, darker, more creepy light. It, because
this would make Lionel sort of the
unreliable narrator. So I'm wondering if it's just how he's remembering it. But then again, maybe I'm giving the film too much credit and it's just bad acting. But there is that also.
And
I have to say, the movie does, well, one thing I noticed was this was put out by Barnholtz Entertainment. And when I saw that logo come up in the beginning, I thought, oh, I am in trouble. Because Barnholtz Entertainment has put out most of the bad real life serial killer films. I think they put out all of Michael Pfeiffer's films. I believe they put out Uwe Lammel's films, but I could be wrong. Almost all the ones I've ranted on have been put out by Barnholtz Entertainment. And with that, I was like, oh, God, I'm in trouble. It's not as bad as those, I guess. I mean, and one thing that really got me was the first time I saw this, I thought, none of this happened. Like, this is completely fictional. Is any of this based on a true story? Well, now, after so many years of reading and seeing more things about Dahmer, and this is just a portion of the books and documentaries that I own on Dahmer and that I've seen.
That now
Watching it, okay, there actually is a lot of historical accuracy to this film, so I will give that credit. Yeah, some of the dates are off. Maybe some of the events are altered slightly. The only victim they mentioned is the first one. His name has been changed. That's always going to happen. So, coming from like a historical accuracy standpoint, it's about as accurate as any other really low budget uh, film. It seems to be based on a father story, but there's no credit to the book or Lionel Dahmer. So I don't know if it was based on that, but there wasn't enough for like the adaptation credit, or they didn't get the film rights. But I was surprised by the historical accuracy of it. Now again, it's not like Dahmer on Netflix or Dahmer 2002 with Jeremy Renner. Uh, it's more accurate than Secret Life. I'll give it that. It's almost a bullet point film, told from the eyes of Lionel. Uh, I've gone over what a bullet point film is, where anyone that's into reading about Jeffrey Dahmer, there's key things that's going to pop up in everything, every single one of them. The Jeremy Renner 2002 film, prime example of a Jeffrey Dahmer bullet point film, just like the 2002 Ted Bundy film with Michael Riley Burke, the most bullet point Ted Bundy film. This has this has the mannequin, the
lockbox.
in fact his first victim was a hitchhiker, him flunking out of Ohio State and the military, his child molestation charge in 1988, him moving into an apartment.
Uh, More into his child.
Hood, like, yeah, when Lionel pulled like dead rodents and bones out from under the house, Jeff plays with the bones and says they're like fiddlesticks. Uh, there, there's a lot of things that you'll find in every other piece of Dahmer, and where where it's all told in these separate flashbacks, it almost makes them feel like Jeffrey Dahmer vignettes, which the 2002 film was kind of like that too. That was mostly told in flashback. That's a much better film than this. But then you have the look of the film, and it
It's a step above.
shot on Shidio. A lot of the flashbacks, it's only differentiated by being black and white. The the flashback to Jeff's birth, uh, that looks horrible with how hazy it is. Uh, the the stylistic choices kind of feels like an Uwe Lamel film. There's this recurring image of Lionel and Jeff walking towards the camera down a dirt road, and it will kind of get like that, like quick flashes. So it tries to be stylish, but it doesn't always work. Uh, the thing is, there is a good movie in here. There is a compelling story. There is a good movie. Uh, you take someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, who did come from, his family had their problems, but especially by serial killer standards, he came from a good home. So, what would a parent think if their son was Jeffrey Dahmer, and he finally got arrested, and you didn't know anything, and you're just
Completely reflecting,
on everything, like
trying to analyze.
what? That's actually the tagline. What went wrong? So it has a really good premise. It has a promising premise. The way they handle the Lionel and Jeffrey relationship, there's definitely sparks of a good movie in here. It just lies in the execution. The execution is not well done. The flashbacks are all jumbled up. It can be hard to tell what time frame we're supposed to be in. It doesn't go chronologically. It doesn't go from him as a young kid to high school to college, military to late 80s.
It doesn't go chronologically.
It's all jumbled up, which, from a realistic standpoint, I'm sure his memories would be all jumbled up. I don't know if that's what they were going for. Uh, there could have been an easier way to tell what time frame we're in. Now again, for someone that's read a lot on Jeffrey Dahmer, it's easy to tell what time frame we're supposed to be in. But I can definitely see this movie being confusing for people who don't know as much. Now, and I'm sure this could be another film that people hate because it doesn't show the murders. At one point, that when I first watched it, that is kind of what I thought. When I watched it, are we going to see any kills? Are we going to see Dahmer doing his thing? But that's when I was young and stupid. Uh, Now I realize that yes, if they showed the murders, it wouldn't make any sense. That's why the one murder we do see is through Jeff's flashback, which is the very beginning. Then the rest of the film is all Lionel's flashbacks. He wasn't there for any of the murders, so of course he's not going to see anything. So of course we're not going to see anything. So it makes sense.
Of
Of
course,
course, these themes would be explored more somewhat by Fred Dahmer and the Netflix series, which I think did it miles better. But I can definitely give this film a lot more credit than I did uh, 13, 14 years ago. Back then, I fucking hated it. I absolutely despised this film. I thought it was a complete piece of shit. I would still say it's probably the worst Jeffrey Dahmer film, but you know, a lot of the historical accuracy is right, or at least similar, maybe altered slightly. There's only like one or two things that are just drastically like, no, this did not happen whatsoever. Only a couple things. So and that surprised me the most was how accurate it is. Granted, it pretty much feels like a bullet point film, but it really is the execution that's the main issue for this film. Uh, Scott Korns, who plays Lionel, he does fine. Uh, I would probably say it's the direction. Uh, and it's not even that the writing is bad. The writing really isn't that bad either. So I'm guessing it's just the direction he was given. Because a lot of scenes Lionel does fine. Scott Korns does fine as Lionel. Kathy Barnett is kind of one note as Sherry, just sort of like the passive aggressive wife and stepmother. But I have to say, Rusty Steary, whether his bad acting and intentionally creepy moments are intentional, like, you can't be too careful, Dad. Come on now. Like, whether that's just because that's how Lionel is seeing it now, looking back, or it was just bad acting, I don't know. Hey, he looks all right as Jeff. He's not the worst I've seen. Uh, but one thing they do is they do kind of treat Dahmer almost like a mythical character because we see him in the very beginning, and then
Other than Flash,
flashbacks up until the last scene of the film. The only time we see him is like on the TV, just like a thumbnail by the uh, news anchor. So it really creates this kind of mystique about him, which I don't know if that was right, but so yeah, uh, there's definitely enough here to see that there is a good movie. There's a good
movie in here somewhere is
just the execution. It's
just the not the budget.
because I've seen Les do a lot more, but maybe just the
Well, maybe with
writing with how the scenes are placed, the editing, and definitely the direction, and maybe some of the acting. Actually, a lot of the acting, but yeah, there's definitely a good movie in here. I would still like to see a movie. Well, I'd say I'd like to see a movie centered around Lionel and Sherry, reflecting on their past, finding the warning signs. But that's kind of my friend Dahmer, even though that's told present day, not flashbacks. And now that we have the Netflix series, which is the best thing on Dahmer, film or TV wise, non documentary wise, we really don't need any other Dahmer films. That captured everything perfectly. But I do wonder what a good film with this premise would be, where it's all flashbacks, all kind of reflecting on what went wrong. But now that we have the Ryan Murphy series, we don't really need any Dahmer film anymore because that one is perfect. But this film did and does have a lot of potential. So I did not hate it as much as I thought I would, which was a complete surprise. But it's still a pretty bad movie. So and with that, I'll say it's still probably the worst Jeffrey Dahmer related film, even though uh, well, maybe its historical accuracy puts it just above the Secret Life film. But with that, I guess we'll get into the brief summary and then the fact versus fiction breakdown of it.
Jeffrey Dahmer, aka the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, is one of the most notorious serial killers in history. Between June 1978 and July 19th, 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 young men and boys, ranging in age from 14 to 33. After being lured to his home, he would drug his victims, strangle them, take Polaroids, practice necrophilia, and then dismember them, keeping body parts around his apartment, such as skulls, whole heads, skeletons, hands, genitalia, and even stored their meat for consumption. His crimes were a gradual progression. He didn't practice necrophilia right away, and he did not engage in cannibalism until his eighth victim, Ernest Miller, and starting with his 11th victim, Errol Lindsay, he would drill into their skulls and pour acid or hot water into their brain, hoping to render them into submissive sex zombies. Dahmer was born in Milwaukee on May 21st, 1960, to chemist Lionel Dahmer and a stay at home mother, Joyce. His brother David was born when Jeff was 6. As a child in the Bath Township of Ohio, Jeff was known to be emotionally distant, withdrawn, and only showing interest in collecting and dissecting roadkill and other dead animals. He was a teen alcoholic shortly after realizing he was gay and having no one to talk to about it, and enduring his parents' constant fights. And he was a class clown and graduated high school in 1978. It was that summer Dahmer's parents finally divorced, and he claimed his first victim, 18-year-old Stephen Hicks, who was a hitchhiker. He then had short stints at Ohio State, the Army, and living in Miami, all cut short due to his drinking. From 1981 until 1990, Jeff lived with his grandmother, Catherine, in West Allis, Wisconsin. During this time, Dahmer worked at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, starting in 1985. Then he discovered the gay bars and was soon blacklisted from the gay bathhouses for drugging and leaving the men there after his assault on them. This led to him taking men to hotels, and it was at the Ambassador Hotel he killed his second victim, Stephen Tuomi, on either September 15th or November 20th, depending on the source, of 1987. This is what kicked off his official murder spree. He was arrested for numerous sex-related crimes in 1981 for drunken disorderly conduct, 1982 for indecent exposure at a Wisconsin fair, 1986 for lewd and lascivious behavior for masturbating in the presence of two 12-year-old boys, and again in 1988 for luring a 13-year-old to pose for photographs. While living at his grandmother's, he killed 3 more young men. After moving into the Oxford apartments in 1990, he killed 12 more victims and began his cannibalism and making his macabre abattoir. One of his victims at this time, 13-year-old Laotian boy, Konrad Sentasophone, which was on May 27, 1991, was actually the younger brother of the boy Dahmer molested in his 1988 charge. On July 22, 1991, his to-be 18th victim, Tracy Edwards, escaped his apartment and flagged down police. When they got back to apartment 213, they found his Polaroids and a head in the refrigerator, immediately arresting him. This led to a media explosion, and Dahmer became one of the most infamous killers. He was found guilty of 16 of the 17 murders and sentenced to 999 years. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer and fellow inmate Jesse Anderson were beaten to death by another inmate, Christopher Scarver. In the years since his arrest and death, there have been countless documentaries, books, films, and even a comic book made about him. Jeffrey Dahmer-related artifacts have become some of the most sought-after murderabilia. And so we'll go into the fact
versus fiction breakdown of the film, which I remember this movie being wildly inaccurate. So I was actually pretty surprised on this second watch, again, over 10 years later, with how much it actually got right, even if it is kind of an altered telling of it. But it opens up in the courtroom, a very small courtroom, with Jeff giving his testimony or confession of his first victim, which he names a guy named Lucas, who is a hitchhiker killed with a barbell, whom we see through flashback, seemingly passed out or passing out on the couch. This is partially true. Dahmer wasn't tried for Stephen Hicks in Wisconsin. It was actually in Ohio, where he actually committed the murder, which was a smaller trial. Of course, his first victim was named Stephen Hicks. He was a hitchhiker. It was June 18th
of 78. He did
bring him back to his house, kill him with a barbell, but it was when Hicks was wanting to leave. Like, he was on his way out, and that's when Dahmer panicked. Here, it makes it look like he's passing out on the couch. He comes up behind him and hits him. And, of course, these lower-budget films are always going to change the names of the victims. That they almost always do that. Plus, it shows Jeff in a convertible with the top down that the hitchhiker comments on. The car that Dahmer had when he picked up Stephen Hicks was the family Volkswagen Beetle that was given to him after graduation. So it shows Joyce going into labor May 19th, 1960. He was born the 21st. Uh, in the bright, grainy effect of this flashback, it makes it very hard to tell what's going on. It looks awful. It's not like that throughout all the flashbacks. I'm guessing this one just because it's the oldest, which is, as I said, one of my bigger flaws with the film is uh, the look they go for it in a lot of the shots. This one is very hazy and grainy, very hard to see. Uh, Joyce and Lionel seem happy at his birth, but they were having problems even at that point. So then we jump to present day, I guess. Well, not really present day because the opening showed Jeff at trial. But we jump to September 1991, and this is when Lionel finds out Jeff has been arrested. Uh, he gets a call from Grandma. She says, I haven't heard from Jeff. He was supposed to come over tonight. He says, I'll call him. He calls his apartment. The police answer conveniently to say that he's been arrested. And then there's a big back and forth of him calling people to see what's going on. Of course, Jeffrey Dahmer was arrested July 22nd of 91, so this one's a little bit behind. And I believe Lionel was called by the police after he was brought in. So, and this scene goes on for quite a while. A lot of back and forth, a lot of phone calls, uh, including. Oh, but he's also in a lab. I'm guessing this is just their way of showing, hey, Lionel Dahmer was a chemist. Uh, I guess that was their way of doing that. Uh, Calls grandma back and says the police are searching the. She says the police are searching the house. I don't think the search of her house was immediately after his arrest. She said they had a warrant, which I don't think you need a warrant for a crime scene. I don't think they needed a warrant to search her house because he'd already confessed to murders in that house, so it had become a crime scene. Then Sherry calls. She seems very passive aggressive towards all things Jeff, when I've read and heard that she was the driving force behind trying to keep them as a family. uh, when, when she does ask if he got arrested for molestation, which of course he had been arrested for that prior in 1988, convicted in '89, but that's when she's told no, it was homicide. Um, Lionel in a police interrogation room as he waits for Jeff. We get brief flashes of Jeff as a kid, flashes of the mannequin in the bed, and distorted voiceover of the conversation of the box, which are all things that we're going to see later on in the film. There is a recurring element, like there are these kind of quick montages like that, and there is the recurring image of both Jeff walking towards the camera on a dirt road and Lionel walking towards the camera on a dirt road. Sometimes they're put side by side, almost as if they're going down the same path together. That's a recurring image throughout the film. uh, Flashback of when Jeff was little and he got stuck in a bunch of mud and Lionel had to help him. I believe there was a story about that Lionel shared. First thing Jeff asks when he's brought into the room is Grandma okay? I believe that was one of the first things he said to Lionel. And then we just get, throughout most of the film from that point, it's all flashbacks to different points of Jeff's childhood. He's over at Grandma's playing cards with her. And throughout pretty much the rest of the movie, he's going back on all these memories, trying to pick apart all the red flags or warning signs, which how Jeff dressed up as the devil for Halloween, which is true. Uh, Killed goldfish that he gave to a teacher who gave them to some other student. He poured motor oil in the water and killed him, which is true, but it was actually tadpoles that happened with. Uh, Talks of Jeff being too shy at school, and then Grandma reminding him, Lionel, that he was also really shy. In a line like, "You ought to know what that boy's doing before he even does it, because they're so alike." And I remember the first time I saw this, because it doesn't really do anything to differentiate this flashback from the rest. Uh, Even the two kid actors look very similar. It probably is the same one. But it shows a young boy and a young girl. He's got a stopwatch, and he hypnotizes her and has her take her shirt off, and he looks amused. The first time I saw this, I thought it was Jeff, and I thought, okay, that never happened, and why would he do that? Uh, but then watching it again and having read A Father Story, I do know that was something that Lionel did as some form of gaining control over someone. But the way the flashback's presented, it looks just like all the other ones, and it was kind of confusing. But that scene actually is Lionel. Uh, we hypnotize the girl. Uh, it mentions the dog's head on a stick. We actually get a flashback to that. But Lionel saying he never really knew if he did kill the dog or if he found it, which Jeff had always said he found the dog. He had never killed animals. But Lionel had kind of always maintained that he didn't know 100% sure. Uh, Flashback to when Lionel dug dead rodents out from under the house and taking out all these bones. Jeff picking up the bones, looking at them, and he says they're like fiddlesticks, which is true. There was like a dead skunk or a rodent underneath the house, so Lionel pulled it out. There was all these bones. He dumped the bones in a pail, and when it clicked, that's when Jeff said it's like fiddlesticks. And this was supposedly Jeff's first encounter with death, animals, bones, that sort of nature. So that's mostly true. Uh, and Lionel, it does show Lionel stopping him from touching the bones because it's unsanitary. But I think in real life, Lionel was actually uh, taken aback by his curiosity because Jeff hadn't seemed interested in much of anything at that point. Uh, Shows Lionel and Sherry watching a talk show where these anonymous guests say that they were friends with Jeff in school and that he was touched by his dad and beaten by his stepmom. That did happen, but of course, found out to be lies. It wasn't true, but that uh, instance is true. However, I think it was like weeks or months after Jeff's arrest. This all makes it look very like the same night of his arrest. It doesn't really do a lot to show how much time has passed. Uh, so yeah. um, Flashback to when Lionel found out that Jeff had been drinking all through his time at Ohio State and flunking out. Uh, him telling Sherry, Lionel telling Sherry about his past and his affinity for fire, starting fires, and when he was a kid, burning down the neighbor's garage, which is a true story. Uh, there's another flashback of when Lionel was called to Grandma's to investigate a smell. The smell came from down in the cellar. Uh, and she said that she doesn't go down there. Jeff's always down there. And then Jeff telling him that it's still his taxidermy, his roadkill experiments, and him believing it because he had done that all through school. So, kind of him just telling him, you're at grandma's, kind of be more courteous. That did happen. Uh, and this happened numerous times. Grandma would call Lionel several times. Hey, it smells here. Hey, there's something going on. Can you come fix something? Uh, which she also says that Jeff like disappeared for weeks at a time, which I don't think that was true. But There was one stylish choice that I thought was kind of neat, and it's when Lionel goes down into the cellar. He finds all these trash bags. He sees the blood. He sniffs it, and he thinks it's rotten meat. And it pans down, and so it shows that he stepped in the blood. And when he steps away, it leaves a bloody shoe print. But it's all black and white, and there's like this purple glow in the shape of the shoe print coming off. I thought that was kind of interesting. So then it goes into the mannequin story. Grandma showing Lionel the mannequin that's found in the closet. True. Uh, Almost every time I see the mannequin being covered in film or documentary, it's always different as to who found it, who disposed of it. I think ultimately, uh, Grandma found it and called Lionel that he threw it out. Uh, I've seen interviews where even Dahmer himself said he didn't know who threw it away. So it's kind of different in every thing you see. Uh, the phone call between Sherry and Lionel about the mannequin. This is still part of the flashback, and this conversation implies that she's suspicious of Jeff being gay, and Lionel not picking that up, and not picking up on her implications. Uh, I don't know if that conversation ever happened. So we go to September of '88, which is shown on a date book that Lionel's writing in. And him getting the phone call of Jeff's arrest for a child molestation of a 13-year-old, sentenced to a year, which is true date. It was September of '88. Uh, True age of the child and true sentence, even though it did mention work release. And then Lionel meeting with his attorney, which I'm guessing is based on Cheryl Boyle, about getting Jeff psychiatric help. I don't know if he went to Gerald Boyle for that. I know Lionel wrote a letter to the judge. And he does mention that in this scene. And of course, the letter went unanswered. And then we get a quick snippet of Lionel finding the box in Jeff's closet just before he's getting ready to be sentenced, uh, which is true, but it cuts away as soon as he finds it, and then later on we come back to it. A scene of when Lionel found Jeff alone at the family home after the divorce, which is true. Only when Lionel goes in the house, there's a couple friends. There's like a pentagram drawn on the table, like they're having some seance party. I don't think that's true. As far as I know, Jeff was completely alone in that house for 3 months. But I do believe that is when he met Sherry for the first time. Jeff did. um, it somewhat recreates the Thanksgiving 1990 home video where Lionel's filming Jeff sitting with cross-legged, flipping through a magazine. That was from Thanksgiving Day 1990. He asks some questions like, or he answers somewhat like, "Oh, my new apartment. I really like living there." He says things similar to the home video, and it's made to look like a home video. So I'm guessing they're trying to recreate that. Uh, so then it shows Lionel and Sherry going to his apartment for the first time, and it shows uh, the security measures like two padlocks on the bedroom door, a lock on the freezer, which is true. He also had security cameras in the living room. I think he had alarms as well. And the excuses that Jeff came up with, which I'm sure some people are going to say that he's acting too creepy. Like, Lionel asks him why he has like padlocks on the freezer in the bedroom. And he's like, "It's a bad neighborhood, Dad. Can't be too careful." Like, people are gonna say he's acting obviously creepy. Maybe I'm giving the film too much credit, but what I took from that is maybe he said it normally at the time because these flashbacks are as Lionel remembering. So maybe now he's picking out the warning signs so now they sound creepy. Like, oh, it's obvious he's being creepy then. Uh, Maybe that's why. Like, maybe now he's remembering it. It's starting to click. Maybe I'm giving the film too much credit. But, so then we go back to the box scenario. And the whole back and forth of, Jeff opened it. So it's my privacy, open the box. Why can't I have my privacy? He does say things like, "Can't I just have 1 square foot of privacy?" Which Lionel said was something he asked during that back and forth. Shows Lionel dropping Jeff off at counseling, but he doesn't go in. He just leaves to get drunk, comes back way later. Lionel leaving him there, which he did used to do. I'm not sure if he ever left him. I don't remember if in a father story it mentioned that. And also, it's kind of hard to tell, as I said, because the flashbacks itself are uh, non-linear. Because the previous flashback was him in his apartment, 1991. Now we're going back to in between Ohio State and the military. Because after he doesn't go to counseling, he goes to get drunk and is left in the parking lot. It shows him getting off the bus from boot camp, which is true. He was in the military. The voiceover of Lionel realizing he had already killed at that point, stored the body in the storm drain, which is true, but Jeff would later go and retrieve the body from the storm drain and smash the bones, disperse them, and then get rid of the flesh. Uh, Shows Lionel finding out that he has been discharged from the military uh, for alcohol. Uh, Lionel realizing that Jeff had already killed. Yes, I said that. Only he uses the name Danny, so now I don't know if it was Danny Lucas or if he just got the name wrong, or if it's implying that the murder from the very beginning is actually not the first victim, implying that maybe he picked up a few hitchhikers, which is not true. Stephen Hicks was the only one he picked up by roadside. Uh, so then this detective comes in, and there was a scene earlier where he's kind of saying like, "I'm watching you, Dahmer," because this is when there were still allegations of his father touching him, his stepmother beating him. But now the detective comes in and says, "No, Jeff cleared both of you." Then he shares the story about how no matter what you do as a parent, uh, sometimes he'll go off the rails, and how his daughter, no matter what he did go on to try to rob a convenience store and was shot and killed. That never happened. I don't think a story like that was ever shared. Even more so, a couple scenes later, Lionel looks out the window and the detective shoots himself in the head in his car while holding the photo of his daughter. That never happened. I'm guessing that's just there for like dramatic effect, for Lionel to feel like, uh, sort of like I could have done more, but then again, no matter what I did, my son is just evil. Maybe my only option is to also kill myself. I don't know what they were trying to say, but in reality, no, that never happened. Lionel thinking it could have been Joyce's pills while she was pregnant. That created Jeff. He does mention 26 a day. It has been said that she'd been taking 26, 27 pills a day while pregnant. So then it goes into grandma's dementia, which, yeah, she had completely succumbed to dementia by the time his crimes were fully out in the open. Uh, Lionel giving a press conference to the people outside about not knowing anything or not being able to catch anything early on. Uh, I'm not sure if that happened, or at least at his house or at grandma's house. Then the last scene is them at the courthouse, probably in one of the private rooms. Lionel puts a tie on Jeff, ties it for him, and then we get freeze frame as they hug. And it ends with Um, texting Lionel Dahmer visited and corresponded with his son often while Jeff was in prison. He, he believes Jeff came to experience both remorse for his crimes and a peace within himself, or in a degree of peace within himself, which is true. He visited at least once a month, called all the time, and he did say that he believes that Jeff was remorseful for his crimes and found peace when, because there was a period where Jeff found God and he was baptized. Baptized May 10th, 94, the same day John Wayne Gacy was executed. So he believes that Jeff found peace and was remorseful. So that is Raising Jeffrey Dahmer. It's still a bad movie. It's not a good movie at all. I Again, I would put this in the realm of above Uwe Lamel, but either worse or just as bad as your typical uh, Michael Pfeiffer film. 'Cause not all Michael Pfeiffer films are bad, but most of them are. There is a good movie in here. Of course, a lot of the themes in this film would go on to be discovered more in somewhat My Friend Dahmer, definitely the Ryan Murphy Dahmer series on Netflix. These themes would be
Explored. The
acting ranges from really bad to somewhat serviceable. Uh, Rusty Sneery does okay as Dahmer, uh, mostly just in look. I, I think he had poor direction for acting. It's very disorganized. It's okay that it's non-linear, but I feel like there was probably a better, less confusing way to handle it. I mean, someone who really knows the Dahmer story. I mean, someone who has read or seen a lot on Jeffrey Dahmer will be able to pick what scenes are where in the timeline. But for someone who has just a very vague knowledge of Dahmer, they're going to find this movie kind of confusing.
This is another movie that I'm
Sure people will hate because it doesn't show any of the murders except for that very first scene in flashback. But again, it's supposed to be through the eyes of his parents, so that makes sense that you wouldn't really see any of the murders.
I definitely liked it.
A lot more this second time around than I did the first time. I didn't hate it near as much as I did the first time. Maybe it's because now I've done a lot more reading on Dahmer. I've seen a lot more documentaries on Dahmer. I, I'd probably still say it's the worst film about him, but uh, the film itself is not as good as its premise. This very notorious serial killer with some of the most heinous crimes in American history. You know, what would it be like for the parents, and what would they be going through, and what would they be thinking about? That's a compelling story. So there is a good movie in here. It it just didn't. Uh, well, I was gonna say it didn't have the budget, but I've seen some really low budget films that were fine, that were well executed. But this is just not it. Uh, yeah, I think there's a reason why this film never gets talked about, never gets brought up. Hell, even when you look up lists of films about Jeffrey Dahmer, the Jeffrey Dahmer files comes up more often than this does, and that's a documentary. That shouldn't even count. So yeah, this is kind of forgotten, which is fair. Uh, uh, I would say the intention and the premise is good,
But the overall
execution is really poor.
so that is the last.
uh, Film of Jeffrey Dahmer that I had left to review. There is one more. I will be re-reviewing My Friend Dahmer because it's been a few years and I want to do it with this format. So that'll be the last film that I have to review, and then there's a few more documentaries I wanted to go over as well. There's still one I have to do a review for. I've already watched and done notes, but so yeah, I would definitely say this is the worst. I'd probably say this is worse than the Secret Life film. even though this one has more going for that one, but it, the execution is so poor that eh, kind of a almost a fictional, straightforward slasher film almost feels better by comparison. Though I feel like this film warrants its existence more than Secret Life.
So,
I went from really hating this film to just finding it very disappointing. So that's 2006's Raising Jeffrey Dahmer. I have a few more Dahmer pieces to go over, so stay tuned for those. And thank you for watching.